Thank you. Good morning. It's truly an honor to be with you today to talk about the Maine economy under pressure. I'm going to start today by very quickly touching on where we are in the business cycle, because that's where we so frequently put our attention. But then I'm going to very quickly step back and look at the long-term trends that are shaping and propelling our economic activity. The first, I'll look at some five major trends that are economic and demographic in nature. And the sixth is how those trends are exerting pressure on all of our households, businesses, organizations, and particularly on our government. We are in an election year, in case folks didn't realize that. It's my sincere belief that if we can discipline ourselves enough to step back, to arm ourselves with the best information about what's happening in Maine and where these forces are pressuring us, if we can keep our eyes on the horizon instead of on the short-term fires, that will enable us to make some great and tough decisions so that we can not only survive through these downturns, but thrive as we come out of them. When Darwin spoke of survival of the fittest, he wasn't referring to the biggest or the fastest or the strongest. He was suggesting that those who survive and thrive for the long run adapt to the environment around them. And that's what we have to do as a state. I did want to share with you that what I'm giving you today is really the first chapter in some work we've been doing with the Maine State Chamber over the last several months in a report we'll be releasing early this summer. This chapter looks at the economic and demographics that are pressuring us. But over this time, we have collected, cataloged, and analyzed about 200 reports on Maine's economic issues and boiled down the recommendations from probably many of you in this room over the years to try to come up with the very best recommendations on the major issue areas. We've also surveyed thousands of Maine people, and thanks to the Portland Chamber's participation, along with about 19 other partners and their membership groups, we got over 1,000 responses from Maine business leaders telling us the relative priority of these various economic issues. So be looking for that this summer. So let's get going on where we are. We're going to start with a short-term look, because these are the fires of the day. This gives you some insight into where our economy is right now. This is wage and salary employment on a monthly basis, and you can see it's been a pretty scary time. We went into a free fall at the start of 2008, and it felt like the worst of times, and we wondered if we would ever come out of it. But the good news, when you put it in some perspective, we have been falling over a period of time. We've lost about 30,000 jobs, and that's about 5% of our current job base. When you put it in perspective with the recessionary period that you can see back in the early 1990s, we lost 35,000 jobs, which at that point was 6.5% of our job base. So the key points in this are to see, if you look at those last few data points, we have started to turn the corner. And I'll hope that we'll continue along a positive path. And the other thing to keep in mind is we've been through a deep recession before. As painful as it is, it hopefully gives us the courage to make some tough decisions, and we will emerge from it as we have in the past. The other key indicator we tend to look at is unemployment. And again, in this downturn, to give you an idea of the relative severity of the downturn, unemployment did increase to its 20-year high. Haven't seen that since the early 1990s. We do remain below the U.S. average, however, and U.S. is shown in green here, and Maine in red. And we've been actually stable around 8.2% for a number of months. So hopefully we're starting to see some improvement in this indicator. On our website, we have a number of other factors that we look at, and I'll just tell you they're all starting to give us some hope. Automobile sales have been in a free fall. They've stabilized. Building supply sales have stabilized. We've started to see customer gains again at Central Maine Power Company. And housing units authorized has started to turn the corner. So I think the worst of this is behind us. So now we're going to turn to the long term. We're done with the fires of the day. I start with this image to illustrate the point about pressure. You may recognize this as the ship, the Endurance, that Sir Ernest Shackleton used on his adventure to Antarctica. He and his men got caught in the ice. And they were caught in this ice for several months. And on a day-to-day basis, you couldn't see what the pressures were doing to the boat. But slowly but surely, over time, the pressures of those ice flows started to tip the boat and, in fact, ultimately destroyed the boat. And it wasn't anything you could see. It wouldn't have made front-page headlines in any way. But these pressures are very real. And it forced Shackleton and his men to completely rethink their mode of transport, and their very survival depended upon it. And that's what we're facing in Maine, these long-term trends that are putting pressures on us that we have to deal with. So Shackleton and his men, their vision was to cross Antarctica. In Maine, what's our vision? Well, ultimately, as I look at the work over the years, whether it was at CMP or in state government or now at MDF, we're looking at a vision of a high quality of life for all Maine people. And we know that if we're going to attain that high quality of life, we have to have a very strong economy, we have to have vital communities where people feel safe and engaged, and we have to have a healthy environment. That is Maine. Where those three things intersect, that's where we will reach that quality of life. But obviously the focus of much of our work is on the economic picture. And you cannot have a high quality of life and sustain it if you don't have a strong economy. That has to be central. So if income's a great overall measure of how our economy is doing, I'm here with some good news. We've made progress over the years. Back in the 70s and prior to that, Maine ranked in the mid-40s in terms of per capita income. We've reached a new plateau in 30th this year, the most recent figures. So we've come a long way. But the fact remains, we need to do better. We need to make the choices and the appropriate investments to move us to that next plateau. And the other thing we need to keep our eye on for the long run is the productivity of our businesses. We need to create an environment in which our businesses will invest in themselves, and our state government needs to make sure that we focus our limited dollars and resources to the very greatest end. As you look at this chart, the good news is Maine's productivity has increased over the last 3 or 4 decades. But the bad news is we have not kept pace with the nation. We are not as productive as an economy, and we need to make sure we're making the investments to close that gap so that Maine people can compete strongly with the best technology, the best equipment, the best education possible, because that's how we will raise incomes for Maine.